Hey everyone. So just to mention a few things about the annual report that Social Security put out. This should concern all of you because it's got some issues. And if you're not going to retire, if you're going to retire 15 years or later from now, this should concern you because you're going to have to prepare on your own and not rely on this. But both Social Security and Medicare have long-term financing shortfalls. The trustees recommend that lawmakers take action sooner than later because right now they have a lot of options on the table to work with. But as time goes on, those options come off the table and then they'll be forced to take drastic action, which will affect everybody. Right now, Social Security and Medicare account for 42% of all federal program expenditures, which is huge. The cost growth will exceed GDP growth from now through the mid-2030s because of all the baby boomers retiring and the low birth rate after that. So all the low birth rate after that is less people going into the workforce to pay for the baby boomers. Social Security has an 83-year history. It's collected $20.9 trillion in those 83 years and paid out $18 trillion. So the asset reserves are $2.9 trillion, which are held in two trust funds. And just to point out, the OASI is the Old Age Survivors Insurance Fund, and then there's the DI, which is the Disability Insurance Trust Fund. Those two trust funds are what hold the money for Social Security. This is the acronym when they combine both of these for statistical reasons. Then Medicare, there's two funds. You have the HI, the Hospital Insurance Medical Part A, and SMI, which is Supplementary Medical Insurance, Parts B and D. The trust funds will be depleted, the Social Security ones will be depleted in 2034, which is in 16 years. The 75-year projection is that the deficit, after these are depleted, the deficit will be equivalent to 2.8% of all payroll, or 1% of all GDP. Our entire economy, 1% of it will represent the deficit just for Social Security, and that's just huge. The Disability Insurance Trust Fund reserves will be depleted in 2032, which is 14 years from now. And for the first time this year, since 1982, the first time in 36 years, total cost for Social Security is projected to exceed its total income, including interest. That's why the reserve fund is starting to get depleted. And then after 2034, the taxable income will only be able to pay 75% of Social Security benefits. So once that trust fund is gone, they'll only be able to pay out 75% of Social Security benefits. And that will be the case they project through 2092, so that affects everybody. Also by current law, the government can only pay out the benefits with the money they raise through the trust fund and through taxing people's current checks, so they cannot borrow to pay Social Security benefits. So in 2034, if they don't do anything, retirees then will only receive 3/4 of what they expect to receive. Again, that's why you don't want to rely on Social Security. Annual cost of Social Security benefits will be right now it's the equivalent of 13.7% of workers' taxable earnings, but that will be 16.8% in 2039. So that shows what a drag on the economy this is going to be. Social Security right now Social Security costs 4.9% of our entire GDP, but in 2038 it'll be 6.1% of our entire GDP. That's an extra 1.2% of our entire economy is going to get eaten up by this. If our economy is growing at between 2 and 3% a year, and 1.2 percentage point of that 2 to 3% growth rate gets eaten up by this, that's pretty bad. And then of course when we add in the Medicare, which I'll talk about, that'll eat up the entire growth rate of our economy. Medicare has two separate funds. You have the HI, the hospital insurance, Medicare Part A. That's what pays for hospital stays, home health services after hospital stays, skilled nursing facilities, and hospice care. The supplementary insurance, SMI, supplementary insurance, also known as Parts B and D, this pays for physicians, outpatient hospitals, home health care, and other things. Part D is subsidized access to drug insurance coverage and premium and cost sharing subsidies. Now the HI, again the hospital insurance, Medicare Part A, the HI trust fund will be depleted in 2026. That's 8 years from now. And then after that, the revenues, okay, again, you have the trust fund, and then you have the revenue that we pay out of our paychecks. So the combination of that pays medical benefits. But when that trust fund is gone in 8 years, the money they take out of our paychecks will only pay 91% of the costs. And then by 2039, 78% of the costs will be covered. And once that fund is gone, I think we all know they'll never build up a new fund because they don't even have the discipline to keep the fund we have. Then there's no way that'll happen. So again, 8 years from now, 10% of the benefits will not be able to be paid out. So that's going to represent a huge problem, and that's going to continue to get worse as time goes on. And you tell me how they're going to fix this. The 75-year actuarial deficit in the long term, the deficit represents 0.82% of taxable payroll and 0.4% of GDP. So just this fund, once it's depleted, that alone is going to represent a 0.4% hit on our GDP, which is huge. And then the SMI, the supplementary medical insurance, parts B and D, that apparently is okay, what the trustees are saying, and that's only because beneficiaries, they have to pay premiums. So you have general revenues, but then you also have people paying premiums. So that's the only reason that's okay. But the SMI costs right now represent 2.1% of GDP. By 2037, that'll represent 3.6% of our GDP. And the total Medicare costs right now represent 3.7% of our GDP, but by 2038 it'll represent 5.8% of our entire GDP. So that's an increase of 2.1 percentage points, which if our economy is growing at 2%, which it kind of has been lately, 2%, that increase in Medicare costs because of the fund depletion that alone will destroy the growth rate of our economy. In the conclusion, the trustees say that lawmakers have many policy options to reduce or eliminate the long-term financing shortfalls in Social Security and Medicare, but they need to act sooner rather than later because, like I said before, as time goes on, those options come off the table. That's why you need to write your congressmen and your senators and get them going, because they don't they're not doing anything. They're just not going to act on it. They're going to let it happen because they're just concerned about getting reelected. Now the trustees expect the total cost to exceed total income from this year all the way through 2092. That's 75 years, so that affects everybody. Right now, the total Social Security and Medicare, what it represents of our GDP is 8.6%, but by 2035 that'll be 11.7%, so that's 3.1 percentage points. So again, if our economy is growing at 3% a year, which is pretty good, that will eat up the entire growth rate of our economy, and that'll be devastating to the economy. And if that's a devastating hit to the economy, that's a devastating hit to the businesses, to the stock market, which is your 401k. Do you want to save up for 3 decades and then see it get pummeled? No. So again, write your senators and congressmen and tell them to get going on this, because this affects you. And then that's pretty much what I have for right now. But again, look up your senator, look up your congressman, type them a physical letter and send it to them. Don't do an email, send them a physical letter, because they'll have to actually have one of their staff open the physical letter instead of just, of being in a list of emails. They'll have to open up a physical letter, read it, and then they will, if they're responsible, they'll send you a response letter. But I'm telling you, and don't rely on Social Security, but even then, if you're going to save more in 401k, put it in there, this will hurt that. So, because it's going to hurt the economy, it's going to hurt everybody. This affects all of you, so write your senators and congressmen. Thank you.